There are people in this world whose voices are never heard. The ones passed by on the streets, the ones who sit alone in church, the ones who cry at night, but no one listens. The ones who reach out only to be ignored, and we are often too busy, too distracted, or too indifferent to notice. But make no mistake, God notices. And one day, we will stand before Him and answer for how we treated the least of these. Matthew 25:45 says, "Then he will answer them, saying, Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." There is usually a lonely soul that no one ever sees. For instance, there was a man who came to church every Sunday. He sat in the back row, never spoke much, and left quietly. People greeted him, but no one really knew him. One day, he stopped coming. Weeks passed, no one checked on him. No one asked where he was. One morning, his name appeared in the obituary section of the newspaper. He had died alone. How many people like him have passed through our lives unnoticed? How many have suffered in silence while we laughed with our friends or too busy to even care? You know, sometimes there are cries for help that go unanswered. There was a teenage girl, she sat in her room, feeling worthless. She had been bullied at school and abandoned by friends and even at home, and her family never really listened. She sent one last message to someone hoping for a response. Just a simple, "Hey, are you okay?" But it never came. That night, she made a decision that could never be undone. How many cries for help have we ignored? How many times have we been too caught up in our own world to notice someone drowning in theirs? You know, there was a man, and he was struggling with addiction. He walked into a church desperate for hope. He knew he was a mess. He knew he didn't belong, but he came anyway. The people in the church whispered. Some moved to the other seats. Others gave him judgmental glances. And then he never came back. That night, he drank himself into oblivion, convinced that even God's people had no place for him. How many people have walked into our churches looking for grace but found rejection instead? How many souls have we turned away because they didn't meet our standards of righteousness? Not everyone wanted to hear Jesus. Not everyone wanted to hear Noah. Not everyone wanted to hear Paul. And they even turned against David, and he was a king. The world rejected them, just as it may reject you. But know this, God never will. And the voices of the rejected are not forgotten by God. Isaiah 58:7 says, "It is not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter when you see the naked to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood." There are weights of our actions. Every choice we make regarding others carries eternal significance. We may think that ignoring someone is neutral, but silence can be just as harmful as words. Jesus warned us that what we fail to do for others, we fail to do for Him. So, what excuse will we give? That we didn't have time? That we were too busy with our own lives? The truth is, when we ignore the hurting, we participate in their suffering. There is a cost of indifference. Think of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Two religious men saw the wounded man and walked by. They didn't hate him, they just didn't care enough to stop. And isn't that the sin that we commit daily? We don't necessarily despise the lonely, the homeless, the broken. We just don't want to be inconvenienced. But Jesus wasn't inconvenienced when he went to the cross for us. So are we too busy to stop for someone he loves? Like, who are we in this story? If we were in the time of Jesus, would we have stood beside him? Or would we have been in the crowd yelling, "Hey, crucify him"? If we were in the days of Noah, would we have listened or mocked? If we were in, if we were there when David was hiding in the caves, would we have stood by him or turned against him like many of his own people did? These stories are not just history, there are warnings because we repeat them every day when we reject those whom God has called. There's a pain of being forgotten. Imagine being the one crying out, needing just one person to care, but no one does. That is the reality for many. See, the Bible speaks of God hearing the cries of his people, but what if we are the ones ignoring them? Will we be found guilty of turning a blind eye, or will we be the ones who respond? Now, this isn't about guilt. It's about action. It's about choosing to do better. The good news is, as long as we have breath, we can change. We can be the ones who answer the cries, who notice the forgotten, who love as Jesus did. We can choose today to be different. Psalm 142:4 says, "I look to my right, and I see no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge, and no one cares for my life." There was a boy, okay, who laughed with his friends, showed up at gatherings, and seemed fine, but no one saw what was behind the mask. He would go home, sit in the dark, and wonder if anyone truly cared. He waited for someone to ask the right question, to see past his forced smile, but no one ever did. One day, his seat was empty, his phone was silent, and the people who once called him friend realized they never really knew him at all. How many people like him walk past us every day, and how many hide their pain so well that we never stop to ask? I can think of a few. For example, Robin Williams. There was a mother who there's mothers who give everything. There's this one mother, she worked day and night, sacrificing for her children. She made sure they had food, clothes, and shelter, but no one ever asked how she was doing. She smiled when they needed her, held them when they cried, but when she needed comfort, she had no one. When she finally broke under the weight of it all, her absence was noticed, but only then. How many have poured out everything for others only to be left empty, unseen, or forgotten? There are children out there who just want to be loved. There's a boy, right? He waited by the door, hoping today would be the day. Maybe today his father would show up. Maybe today his mother would say, "I'm proud of you." Maybe today someone would see him. But today was just like every other day. Silence, emptiness, loneliness. He grew up learning that love was something other people received, but not him. How many children have been trained by life to believe that they're unworthy of love? How many hearts have been hardened by years of neglect? There are elderly men who faded away, right? There's an elderly man who faded away because, once he had a family, friends, in a home filled with laughter. But time moved on, and people forgot. Now he sits in a small room in an old folks' home, staring at old pictures, wondering if anyone ever remembered his name. Once a provider, now a forgotten relic, he prays for just one visitor, one call, one moment where he isn't invisible. But the world has moved on. How many elders sit alone, longing for the warmth of human connection, only to be left behind? Right now, as we're sitting in our comfort, there is a man in a cell. A man sits alone in a cold prison cell, staring at the ceiling every day. He writes letters, long, desperate letters to his family. He apologizes. He begs for forgiveness. He asks about his daughter or his son, about his wife, about home, but the letters go unanswered. His family has moved on. His wife found someone new. His daughter or son is now without a father's guidance, and is following probably the wrong crowd. And the man clings to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he'll receive a reply. But the mailbox still remains empty, and he has been forgotten. How many people are crying out for love, for acknowledgement, just a single moment of being heard? How many have we left behind thinking their pain is not our own problem? You know, there are fathers who are cast aside. You know, there was a man who had made too many mistakes. He had been reckless in his youth, selfish, blind to what he had, and now he has to pay the price. His ex cut him out completely. His daughter was growing up without him. He tried calling, he tried writing, but every attempt was met with silence, blocked numbers, unanswered messages, doors that would never open again. He carries a weight heavier than anything he has ever known in his life. The saddest part isn't that these people suffered, it's that they didn't have to. We had every opportunity to love them. We chose not to. It's not too late, so open your eyes, listen to the silent cries around you, be the friend, be the comforter, the love someone desperately needs before they're gone, before the chance is lost. Choose to care. Look around you. Who have you ignored? Who have you judged? Who have you dismissed? This is your moment to reach out. One conversation, one act of kindness, one prayer can change a life. Don't miss the opportunity to be the hands and the feet of Jesus today. One day, we'll all stand before Jesus, and he will show us the faces of those we ignored, the one we rejected, the one we judged, the ones we left behind, and he will say, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. What will we say then? That we were too busy? That we meant to help but never got around to it? That we didn't know? When we know, well, we know now. And we still have time to change. Now here, at Joy of Passions Ministry, you don't have to be one of these people that I've mentioned, okay? Here, on this channel, I'm not forcing, I'm inviting you. There is always a place for your voice to be heard, a place to share your struggles, to connect, to grow, to love, and to be yourself. Don't just watch these videos and go unnoticed, okay? Please make yourself known. There's a home for you here. Now go and find the forgotten. Listen to the unheard. Love the unloved before it's too late. And please try to remember to chew on this scripture, Matthew 25:45. Then he will answer them, saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. See, everyone, again, there will come a day when we stand before Jesus and he will ask us, simply, why did you not do this for me? The faces of those we ignored, the ones we hurt, the ones we left behind will stand as silent witnesses against us. Every cry for help that went unanswered, every soul that longed for kindness but received coldness instead, will be laid bare before the throne of God. In that moment, there will be no excuses, no way to explain our indifferences, no second chances to go back and do what we should have done. The time for mercy will be over and judgment will stand. But what if you never make it into heaven? Like, what if instead you find yourself in hell? There, in that place of torment, you will have all the time in the world to think about it, to remember every person who reached out to you, every friend who tried to pull you back before it was too late, every sermon you heard and ignored. You will remember every moment when you could have repented, when you could have changed, but you chose not to. Hell is not just a place of fire. It is a place of eternal regret, a place where the screams are not just from pain, but from sorrow, from the unbearable weight of knowing it didn't have to be this way. That you had a chance, that you were warned, that love was offered to you and you turned away. You never know who you are helping when you choose to love. You never know if the person you show your kindness to is someone God placed in your path as a test. As a moment of divine purpose, consider the story of Saint Martin. One cold winter night, he saw a beggar shivering in the streets. He had nothing to give except his soldier's cape. So he took his sword and cut his cloak in half and wrapped it around the man. That night, in a dream, Jesus appeared to him, wearing that same half cloak, and he said, "Martin, you clothed me today." What if the person you chose to ignore is Jesus in disguise? What if the one you mistreat is the one you reject? The one you refuse to love is the very test that determines your eternity. Choose love while there is still time. See people while you still can, because one day, either in heaven or in hell, you will remember. And on that day, may you not have to look back in regret. May you look back and see that you lived a life that pleased Jesus, a life that loved the least of these, a life that truly mattered. 2 Corinthians 6:2 says, "For he says, in the time of my favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you." I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. One day, there will be no more chances, no more time to change, no more opportunities to love. The decision we make today will be the ones that echo into eternity. The choices we make now will be the ones we carry before the throne of God. If you are listening to this, it means you still have time. You still have breath in your lungs. You still have a chance to change your story before it's too late. But what will you do with that time? That's the question. Will you continue to live for yourself, walking the path of hurting the broken and the lost, or will you finally open your eyes to see what Jesus has been showing you all along? Imagine your life being played back before you in heaven, every moment, every kindness recorded, every act of selfishness displayed, every time you could have helped but walked away, shown for all to see. What will your story say about you? Will it say that you loved well, that you gave freely, that you stopped for the ones others ignored? Or will it reveal a life of indifference, where comfort mattered more than compassion and pride more than humility? It is a terrifying thought, but it is one we must face eventually, while we still have time to change. See, the truth is, we do not know how much time we actually have left, because every second wasted is a second we will never get back. Every opportunity to love that we ignore is one we cannot undo. But right now, at this moment, we still have a chance to write a different ending. There will come a day when you take your final breath, when your name will be spoken one last time on this earth, when your voice will be silenced forever. But what will remain? What legacy will you leave behind? Will you be remembered as someone who poured out love, who saw the unseen, who made people feel like they mattered? Or will you be forgotten, just another person who passed through this life without making a difference? The choice is still yours, but not for long. Everywhere you go, there are people crying out in silence. The man who sits alone in the church pew wondering if anyone sees him, the single mother who stays up at night wondering how she'll feed her children, the teenager who feels like giving up just waiting for someone to care. What if you were the answer to their prayers? What if God put you in their path for a reason? What if your kindness was the very thing that saved that life? It costs nothing to love. A moment of your time could mean everything to someone else. A kind word could stop someone from ending their own life. A small act of generosity could show someone that God has not forgotten them. And yet so often we walk past these moments, lost in our own world, never realizing the divine appointments we just ignored. You know, one day, again, you will stand before Jesus. You will look into his eyes, filled with love, but also truth. And he will ask, "What did you do with the time I gave you?" Will you be able to say, "Lord, I loved, I gave, I saw the ones you put in my path, and I did not turn away"? Or will you stand there knowing that you wasted the time you were given, knowing that you lived only for yourself? We will still have time to choose differently. We'll have time to love more, to give more, to open our hearts to the people we once ignored. But the time is running out. The clock is ticking, and eternity is closer than we think. You know, live today as if it's your last. Love without hesitation. Give without expecting anything in return. See the unseen. Hear the unheard. Because one day, when you stand before the King, you will want to hear these words: "Well done, my good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord." 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance for his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. How often do we overlook the little guy? The ones who are not loud, the ones who are not famous, the ones who do not fit society's mold of success, beauty, or influence. We have been conditioned to listen to those with power, those with status, to those who have a platform. But history, and more importantly God, has shown time and time again that it is often the unheard voices that carry the most truth. We are so used to following whatever society tells us is important. We let trends dictate who is worthy of attention and who is not. We listen to what soothes our ears instead of the uncomfortable truth, and we praise what is attractive and dismiss what is considered ugly. And yet, in God's eyes, all of these standards are just meaningless. If you are beautiful in this world, you can get away with almost anything, probably even murder, and people will listen to you. Doors will open for you. You will be admired simply by just how you look. But if you are just an average person, or worse, if you look poor and appear weak, if you are different, then society will push you aside. Like, look how the world treats the homeless, okay? As if they're animals, as if they have no story, no worth, no humanity. But let's be real, how many of us are just one tragedy away from being in their position? How many of us could lose everything tomorrow and find ourselves ignored, just like the people we ignore today? God can humble anyone in an instant, so don't get it twisted. He could put you in the shoes of the very person you judged and mistreated. Believe me, I would know. David was just a shepherd boy, forgotten even by his own family, and yet God chose him to be a king. Gideon was the weakest in his family, hiding in fear, yet God called him to be a mighty warrior. And Jesus himself was born in a manger, grew up as a carpenter's son, and was rejected by men, and yet he is the savior of the world. God does not care about society's labels. He does not choose based on appearances, wealth, or popularity. He chooses based on the heart. And often the voices we refuse to hear are the very ones he is speaking through. Many people cannot understand the suffering of others because they have never suffered themselves. It is easy to be indifferent when you have never had a struggle, but pain has a way of opening the heart. When you have been broken, when you have been rejected, when you have been mistreated, you begin to see others differently. I know the pain. I've been through it. And that's why I feel for all of you. And I know what it feels like to be ignored, to be looked down upon, and to be treated less than a human. And that is why I refuse to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, because I know how it feels. The question is, how much pain do you have to go through before you develop some empathy? How much do you have to lose before you finally see the humanity in someone else? Today, I challenge you. Stop listening to the loudest voices, the most popular voices, the voices that tell you what you want to hear, and start listening to the ones you have ignored, the ones who have been rejected, the ones society deems unworthy. Because in the end, when we stand before God, He will not ask how beautiful we are, or how popular we were, or how successful we were. He will ask how we treated the least of these. And on that day, I hope we have no regrets. And that being said, may God keep you. May He bless you. Y'all can go in peace, and peace be with you. Shalom.